夠人又夠。
Good afternoon, members. We have already formed a quorum. First of all, let's invite the administration's team to join us. 3 members from the Food and Health Bureau as well as the FHD. They are respectively Professor Sophia Chen, Undersecretary for Food and Health, Ms. Diane Wong, PAS for Food and Health, and Ms. Rebecca Koo, Senior Superintendent Operations from FHD.
好，咁多謝3位。
Good afternoon. The 3 ladies from the Bureau and the Department. We're also grateful to the Research Office of the Electrical Secretariat. I think it is an excellent report, so I would suggest that we spend more time on getting the report from the Research Office, and then we will have a discussion. But then first of all, I think we need to have some discussion about the matters arising. I think last time we talked about the legitimate and lawful bazaar and festivals or fairs organized by local organizations. We'd like to have a closed-door session, and many have promised to come. So first of all, a discussion with the administration. Would you agree that we have a closed-door session? Because the local organizations have said that their discussion may involve detailed, sensitive information. So they think that it would be better if the meeting is to be held behind closed doors. And then for the invitees, as to how many organizations should be invited so as to facilitate the meeting and which organizations should be invited, well, I have drafted a list of recommended invitees. Members may wish to make a comment. On my part, I've suggested 6 names, like the alliance concerning the CSSA low-income households, and they are also in support of the grassroots bazaars. They had experience at Kaojiang Street in Samshuipo. Another one is the group concerning bazaar development with experience in Maple Street. And then Community Development Front, they have the experience operating in Tongchong. And then for North District, they've also operated from Shekwu-Hui. And then a agricultural bazaar in Yunlong. And then the 6th one, that is the Hong Kong Council on Social Services. Members, any suggestions or comments? We don't have any special comments. What about members? Any suggestions? Or do you have any idea about the optimal number of invitees? Mr. Ray Chen, Madam Chair. Of course, I agree that we should have a review session, but what concerns me is that, in principle, our meetings should be public sessions, so a closed-door session should be fully justified. Of course, I understand that if we want to have a frank discussion, and since so many departments are involved, I'm afraid that when we have an open session, departments may not want to speak frankly, and they would rather stay silent. So when they are outside the view of the camera, they may be more open-minded. As to the comment that the organizers may be talking about sensitive information, for that point, I don't quite get it. I think it's a matter of the ways that they design the bazaar and also the data that they have in possession. Well, I suggest that probably a closed-door session will be better. Well, I think my point is that we need to think through it and then come to an informed decision. Well, Other than the list that I suggested, it seems that members who are present haven't got any other suggestions. So perhaps we can focus on whether the meeting should be open to the public or a closed door one. Mr. Shukafai, as Ray Chen has said, we must be fully justified if we resort to a closed door session. And even when there is a closed door session, when there is a problem, we'll still be discussing it. Now you suggest that we should have it behind closed doors. Is it a request from the organizers or a request from the administration? Well, the organizations have got such a request. There's a request from the organizers. I think they are also of the view that since we're talking about interdepartmental efforts, there may be conflicts among governmental policies. They may think that there will be a frank exchange of views. They don't want the public officers to be overly embarrassed. And for the organizers, in the course of the applications, they may have to refer to sensitive personal data or strategies pertaining to their own organizations. So they may not feel comfortable to talk about that in an open session. It's not that they have anything to hide, but they think that it will be easier to communicate if it is to be held behind closed doors. So members, can I check with you as to whether we have strong views? What about the government's response? Are they in favor or not? We have no comments, we don't mind. If they don't mind, then I leave it with you, Madam Chair. Fernando Zhang. Madam Chair, I think Ray has got a point. For the meetings of the Legislative Council, unless necessary, we don't have it behind closed doors. This is because we are having a public forum and with the separation of powers. So we are checking and balancing the executive powers. This is the nature of this forum. If we have anything behind closed doors, we only do so when we have very sensitive information. Sometimes when we handle so-called commercially sensitive information, we still have public sessions, though blocking out the sensitive information in the papers. Well, you may think that public officers can have a free exchange of views when it is a closed-door session. But other than that rationale, I haven't heard other reasons. But I don't think it is justifiable to rest on one single reason to have a closed-door session. I fully support having a chance to communicate. But to me, I have some reservation about the idea of a closed-door session. Mr. Shukachan. Madam Chair, you have been saying all the time that it has been a request from the organizations, but I find it odd. You have talked about frank exchange of views. Well, at all other meetings, we have had frank exchange of views. Are you saying that for this meeting, vis-a-vis earlier topics like the Disneyland, this one is even more sensitive? Yes, I understand the organizations may have their requests, but I would like to come up with a counter proposal. If there are certain things that they don't want to divulge in public, maybe they can make arrangements through us to take up the matter with the relevant departments. So outside the context of this panel, if we start to create a precedent, I'm afraid other panels will be subject to a similar pressure. That is, how come that when we talk about this topic, we have a closed-door session. When we talk about mental health or the pay and salary conditions of the senior management are not discussed behind closed doors. You have put forward a rationale, but I don't think it is specific enough. I think all the members who have spoken shared my view. Next, Mr. Edward Yu. Well, to me, If organizations insist on having closed-door session, I think we need to respect their wish. It is somewhat like protection of witnesses. If they don't want to disclose their identity or they are shy when they are put on the spotlight with cameras facing them, then I think closed-door session is a good way to handle the matter. Not that we haven't had any closed-door sessions. Like last week when we met with the Hungry Code, it was also behind closed door. So I don't think it's a matter of creating a bad precedent. Had it been a request from the administration or members, it would not be appropriate. However, if organizations are really worried and if they are very insistent, I think we should respect their wish. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. I can't see why we should have a closed-door session. I don't know it. Can you tell me? Well, organizations have said that in the past, when policies were discussed, usually public officers found it difficult to speak frankly on policies, so the progress would be slow. Moreover, we are talking about a review session of the holding of bazaars. We're talking about the need to streamline the procedures. Organizations may also want to talk about difficulties that they've encountered, but they may not want to divulge certain information. So some of them are saying that had it been behind closed doors, it will be more focused, more effective, and then sensitive information can be protected, and they will be more willing to share the information with us. In other words, there's no need to have it discussed here. We can just ask them to make an arrangement to have an appointment with the public officers.
They speak in public, and then officials, they would not say much. They rather talk privately with the officials, then why don't they just meet with them individually? I don't think it's reasonable. It's really unreasonable. They need to tell us why they don't want to speak in public. They demand a closed-door meeting. If they want a closed-door meeting, then they can, for example, take the case to a complaints division, or they don't have to do it through us then. They can meet with officials in complaints sessions. Let me supplement here. At the last meeting, we discussed holding of a review committee on application for bazaars, and government officials promised to attend. And then I and the vice chairman took the lead in arranging for the review committee. After I talked to government departments, the response from the Food and Health Bureau is that it didn't want committee to be led by individual legislators, but be held under this subcommittee. So the deputations asked whether it could be a closed-door meeting under this subcommittee. So therefore, we are discussing it. That's what we're discussing now. Whether we should have an open-door or closed-door meeting. Chairman, the point is we're talking about policies, not just them. On the spotlight are the policies, and the same policies could be applied to other districts, so people in other districts have the right to know as well. People who have not attended the future meeting, they could be stakeholders in the future. So you can't ensure that the people that we're talking to would be the stakeholders only, or they are the only stakeholders. So we need to let other people know how we arrive at our decisions, whatever they are. So I think we should have an open meeting, because we're talking about policy issues here. Okay, point taken. Any other members with views or supplements? Okay, so let's take a vote on it. Members who agree with having a closed-door meeting for the review committee meeting? Edward Yu, Kokaki, 2. Members who are opposed to a closed-door meeting? So because of the voting results, we will... Okay, one abstention. Okay, but let me announce that the future meeting will be an open meeting. Okay, for the review meeting, that is. Okay, now let's move on to item 2. We arranged for the time for that meeting. We just voted on. Item 2 is on bazaar policies and experience of other cities. We'd like to thank the research office for doing a very rich study. And they'll spend 20 minutes on briefing us on the report. Thank you, Chairman. Earlier on, the subcommittee asked the research office to carry out the study on policies on bazaars overseas. So this is the report tabled before you. I will highlight the key points in our study. Our study actually covered the bazaar policies in various overseas cities, on the issues of nature, role and contributions of bazaars, policy framework, and also any support measures and also policies for operating bazaars. Let's look at the definition of bazaars. There's no unified exact definition of bazaar. Broadly speaking, it refers to a place where street hawkers or store vendors gather together to sell goods to people. And bazaars may take different forms. You can see that that could be temporary or fixed bazaars. Operations can be at daytime, at night, or only at weekends. And the locations could vary. Could be in a fixed indoor venue or open door. And the purpose and theme could vary as well. Some bazaars are to provide convenience for people doing grocery shopping. Some may want to develop local economy or to promote cultural activities. The goods sold also of different varieties. Some sell cooked food, others sell agricultural products, some sell handicrafts. So all these could be part of bazaars. When we selected which cities we should focus our study on, we considered whether the cities concerned had various types of markets. So we chose Sydney, London, Singapore, and Taipei as our subjects of study. You can find in this slide that in these 4 cities there are various modes of bazaars. Some sell agricultural products, organic products, or cooked foods, or night markets. And we chose these places because the governments there do have their own policies to facilitate the development of bazaars, and they've also introduced recent measures to support the operation of bazaars. Now on the role and contributions of bazaar. In choosing the locations or cities for the study, we can summarize the following roles and contributions of bazaars. First of all, the cities thought that the bazaars could provide cheap goods to meet community needs. And it could also provide the self-employed and self-employed small owners a chance to operate their own businesses. And also they provide venues for new business owners or new entrepreneurs to develop their businesses. And also some bazaars are tourist destinations that really attract tourists. And some bazaars, according to some studies, in where they are, the shops in the neighborhood also benefit. And bazaars also help a space for residents to have social interactions and develop a community. And bazaars can foster the development of diverse development in a community and add it to the vibrancy of a community. So besides the role and contributions in terms of economic benefits, of course, they are handsome. In Taiwan, in 2013, that is the latest figure we can have, the annual turnover came to $500.1 billion. 70% of hawkers in Taiwan every year make up to 270,000 Hong Kong dollars. In London, in 2014, the annual turnover just in central London came to 4.6 billion Hong Kong dollars. That's the annual turnover. And the study also showed that people who spend in the markets in London would also improve the businesses in nearby shops. Besides the above, we also found that bazaars provide quite a lot of chances for shop owners to be self-employed. In Taipei, there are more than 3,000 licensed hawkers and also managed hawkers. In Singapore, there are more than 10,000 licensed hawkers. In London, the Bazaars in central London provides about 3,000 jobs. Because of the particularly roles of bazaars, the various cities have their own policies on bazaars. In Singapore, it can be dated back to the 60s and 70s. Back in those days, the policy was to provide space for street hawkers. Therefore, they set up hawker centers where the basic facilities to allow the hawkers to operate in a clean and hygienic environment. And all through the years, the government there saw that hawker centers could really meet public demands for cheap household products and also to ease the worries about rising living costs. Since 2011, a new policy was launched. That is, by or before 2027, there'll be 20 more new hawker centers to provide cheap goods to meet public demands. And the hawker centers will be built in public housing estates where there are not adequate eateries. So far, 3 new hawker centers have been commissioned. As for Taipei, policy that dates back to the 1970s. Back then, the government regarded hawking activities as a way to ease unemployment. And several decades on, well, they have been more concerned about obstruction to passageways and environmental hygiene and also competition for spaces among hawkers. Therefore, because of lobbying by hawkers, in the 1990s, they introduced a series of measures to improve the operating environment by tightening some regulations and also allocated space for hawkers so that both licensed hawkers and government-condoned hawkers can operate. In London, you can see that in 2011, policy was enacted in support of the bazaars. In the latest London plan, it stipulated the direction of bazaars should be to support the development of a diverse retail industry and also competitive, successful retail industry, and to provide the needed goods and services for people in residents in London. And also, there should be new public markets in accordance with relevant legislations and also in view of the various developments of the markets to provide appropriate services. In Sydney, there wasn't a clear policy until 2015 when the markets policy was introduced to regulate the approving of new bazaars being applied for. And this is a bottom-up approach. That is, the proposal to set up bazaars was really motivated or promoted by local communities, and only with municipal approval can the bazaars could be held. The markets policy in Sydney resulted in a markets guide that covers the application procedures, approving requirements, and also the operating regulations. And there are also more information provided to the applicants to help them make the applications. So I just talk about how to have a sort of fixed bazaars. As for temporary bazaars in Sydney, Singapore, and London, there are proposals or policy proposals involved, but their proposals are quite similar in that the proponents for temporary bazaars tend to be initiated by local communities or community organizations, and in all 3 cities there are procedures involved for approving the applications for temporary bazaars, and all applicants must have got the approval of the relevant authorities before they can operate, and they also need to approve for the license or permit. The only difference with Hong Kong is that the procedures in those 3 cities are relatively simple. The applicant only need to fill in an application form without having to submit a events plan or application plan. And not only do the applicants have to provide a lot of information, and the authorities there provide guidelines for the applicants to ease their process of applications. How about government support policies for the setting up of new bazaars in Singapore? The focus is on the choice of location in Singapore in order to ensure that the hawker centers are convenient for nearby residents. Therefore, in the 1970s to 1980s, the hawker centers built then, basically all were located in newly built public housing estates. Later on, hawker centers were also incorporated into industrial estates, and the hawker centers built in recent years are located in communities with convenient transportation links. In Sydney, we found that to support organizations in setting up bazaars, there are various kinds of support. First of all, they will arrange for a coordinator under the municipal government to help applicants finish the application procedures. And if during the process of application there are issues with the venue or getting a license, if needed, a hawker small group would be set up to provide opinion to the coordinator to help the applicants deal with the issues. And in some circumstances, the municipal governments would also provide subsidies or sponsorships to operating organizations or bazaars. And the operating organizations would also be allowed to try out new bazaar operations modes.
Next, we will see if they have provided any assistance to their operation. Well, in Sydney, if we have got the non-profit making organizations operating the organizations, a lower land use fees will be charged. In Singapore, if the hawkers have been resettled by the government into the hawker centers, or if they are meeting the requirements of the government's effort to help them during hardship, then they will be given rental subsidies. And also the government provides subsidies in relation to the maintenance fees. For the hawker centers, when they have to be closed so as to carry out enhancement works, rental remission will be provided. During an economic downturn, the government will provide rental rebates. Training has also been provided. In the case of Singapore, at some of the market centers, entrepreneurship programs have been provided. On-the-job training has also been provided so as to enhance their skills and knowledge in running a hawker store. And then for the measures to improve the facilities and the operation of bazaars, between 2001 and 2014, a total of 2.57 million Hong Kong dollars, that is 420 million Singaporean dollars, have been spent so as to improve the 106 hawker centers. For the operation of the new market centers, new management models have been introduced to enhance efficiency. In 2016, they have appointed a Hawker Center 3.0 committee so as to make suggestions and recommendations to the improvements. Recently, their recommendations have been taken on board by the government, like facilities to enhance the efficiency, like central dishwashing and also cashless payment systems. In the case of London and Taipei, again, they have got facilities being improved. The government has been providing subsidy schemes so as to help the bazaars to improve. Like in the case of Taipei, they try to improve the environmental hygiene, facilities, service, and image of night bazaars. And they may create specific logos or special store setups or uniforms for the operators. We've also seen that the local governments have been promoting the bazaars to the consumers as well as the tourists. In Taipei, they have a portal giving out the information. They have published a leaflet for the reference by the visitors in relation to the night bazaars. Sydney has also got something similar. So in conclusion, for the 4 places that we've selected, that is London, Sydney, Singapore and Taipei, the governments recognized the contribution of bazaars towards the community and the economy. They have come up with policies to give support so as to maximize the benefits for London and Sydney. In fact, Bazaar is also part of the urban development plans. For Singapore, they have got the market centers so as to provide cheaper goods and services for the citizens. In relation to regular bazaars, Singapore, Taipei and London have adopted a top-down approach. In other words, the government, in the light of its own bazaar or market policies, decide on the location of the bazaars and the number. For Sydney, it is a bottom-up model. But then the government itself would come up with clear policy frameworks so as to regulate the vetting of the applications. Applicants are also given the right kind of information and guidelines so as to facilitate the application process. For temporary bazaars, Sydney, London and Singapore have got similar application procedures. Applicants must satisfy the regulatory requirements, but then relatively speaking, the procedures are simpler, and the government has also set out clearly the procedures as well as the requirements in the application forms and the guidelines. Well, in terms of facilitating measures, in terms of the provision of on-the-job training, promotion to tourists, the governments have been providing measures to achieve such a target. That's all from us. Thank you very much. Thank you, the research division. I think members can either put questions to the research office or the public officers. Claudia Mo, Ho Kai Ming, KK Kwok, Leung Yu Chung, Xiu Kao Chun have indicated they wish to ask questions. I think 4 minutes each for both the questions and the answers. Claudia. Madam Chair, I want to know whether we've got an English version of this paper. Yes, we do. Where can I get it? Is it already available on the website? Yes, it is. Much earlier. Well, a few times you have mentioned the idea of being self-employed. I think, after all, bazaars and hawkers have this as their characteristic. You also talked about the local community organizations taking the initiative to start a bazaar. I think that's the case for Sydney. It is a bottom-up approach. First of all, I recalled Camden Market. I think they have got many special characteristics. They don't just sell cheap souvenirs to tourists like the London bus and the London mailbox. Rather, they have created their own subculture. I think at Temple Street we have stores run by Nepalese and they sell their accessories. I'm starting to get worried. It seems that the bazaar policy has got nothing to do with our ethnic minorities, but in fact the ethnic minorities can sell goods which is culturally rich in terms of their ethnicity. I think their participation can enrich our bazaars. Here we are talking about a bazaar policy. So for the Home Affairs Bureau, please, through your relevant units, tell the ethnic minorities that they can start thinking about this as a way to make a living. Of course, there are ways to make an application, but I'm sure when you apply, there is a chance that you can get it. For Temple Street, I think there are ethnic minorities running the hawker stores. In Camden Market, I think there are hawkers selling Tibetan fabrics and accessories. So, a question for the administration. Have you ever helped the EMs so that they can sort of play a more significant role here? Maybe I'm exaggerating it. Can you help them to participate in the bazaars? A question for the researchers or the public officers? Public officers. So have we ever helped the EMs to take part in the bazaars? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Mo, for your question. I think probably it's more a policy of the Home Affairs. From our point of view, the Food and Health Bureau has always said that within the EMs or other organizations, when there is a bottom-up approach, and if they're interested, and if they have made a proposal to the district council, when they secure the support of the district council, the FHD would support. Well, I think Ms. Lau would share my view. For us, for Cantonese speaking, it will take a long time for us to go through the application procedures. So does it mean that the EMs would not stand a chance to get the application granted given the language barrier? Well, as I have said, I think the main point is about the district council's approval. If there is support from the district council, then the FHD would start the ball rolling. Is it as simple as that? I don't think so. Are you saying that the green light will be switched on as long as the district council says yes? FHD, please. Well, if they approach us, unless they don't speak Chinese, they don't speak English, as long as they speak either Chinese or English, I'm sure our colleagues can help them. Well, to me, the greatest hurdle is as follows. We need non-profit making organizations organizing the EMs and help them to go through the application procedures. And I want to know whether the ethnic minorities have got any experience here. For the report from the research office, well, I'm sure the London City will help the EMs in taking part in the bazaars. Can our research office give a reply? Yes, paragraph 3.5 of our report. For the markets in London, they hope that the ethnic minorities can have access to low-cost self-employment. So it's been given recognition by the government in London. Maybe my colleague can also supplement. Well, as far as the planning is involved, it has been found that 20 markets have been given recognition in their opportunities and enhancement program. And it has been found that the existence of such markets can help to rejuvenate the neighborhoods, and it can also provide job opportunities to the local people. And for such places, they do have a high number of EMs, so there is an opportunity here. So perhaps the Home Affairs Bureau can take the initiative to liaise with the EM groups so that they are aware of such a policy. I hope government departments can put the message across. Next, Mr. Ho Kai Ming. Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for the research office. According to your experience, by how much is our application procedure more complicated than that in the 4 selected places? Are we lagging behind? And then for coordination, there is coordination in Sydney. What about the ranking of the office or the officers? I think in Hong Kong, I think bureaucracy is posing as a hurdle. So I want to know whether the fact that they have a coordinator has facilitated the birth and the vibrancy of the bazaars. Madam Chair, we have seen that for you to set up a bazaar, you need to meet 3 requirements. First of all, the venue. The relevant organization must identify suitable site, and the venue should have the support of the district council and the local people. And the bazaar won't have a negative impact on public safety, health, order, and environmental hygiene. And then they can put forward a proposal. As to what is to be covered by the proposal, it is up to the organizer involved to find out. In Sydney, it is a bottom-up approach, but first of all, the government has got a coordinator. The coordinator can help the applicants. The coordinator can tell the applicant as to what is involved, and then venue approval would be the first step. It is only when there is an approval for the venue would they move on to apply for a license. Since there's a coordinator guiding the applicants, it will be easier. So whatever information is needed will be made known through the coordinator. Now the City Council will be the approving authority, and the coordinator is a staff member of the City Council. Well, does it mean that, like in the case of Hong Kong, it will be the Secretariat of the lawmakers? No, it's the City Council. It will be the government. He's a public officer. So it is like our district council. So it will be like a staff member of the district office. So it will be someone from the EO grade. Next, Dr. K.K. Kwok. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'd like to thank the research office first of all, but I've got several areas I want you to provide more information on. Firstly, in London, the turnover is $4.6 billion. But how about the national turnover? You know, in terms of economic benefits from bazaars, I think they're huge. I think you could clarify for me and find out the exact number. And also on the application for bazaars, in most places besides Hong Kong, the procedures are simple. So can you provide a comparison for us? You know, in Hong Kong, is it possible that, you know, compared to other places, the people fill in a simple form, but in Hong Kong there may not be even a form. There's no form to fill in, so you have to sort of find out for yourself how you can set up a bazaar. Is there any other places in the world with such policy? And if I'm correct, well, Taipei definitely has the fixed pitches, and operating hours. But how about in London and Sydney? Do they have fixed operating hours? Or is it like Hong Kong twice a year, Mid-Autumn Festival and then Twin Festival? Is that right? Like in Shim Shui Po, you can only hold 2 bazaars a year. What's the situation in those cities? And also a question for the administration. Around the world, there are statistics on the economic benefits of bazaars. So how about the Hong Kong government's statistics on that? And I can see that, you know, in other places, bazaars are dealt with in a mature manner. Say there's a coordinator in Sydney and support measures, for example, in terms of rental support. So how about in Hong Kong? I think Hong Kong should really catch up with them quickly. And also, if the government has the intention, and I'm sure our subcommittee would be happy to go to the various cities with the government to learn lessons from them, to see, or we can help SAR officials understand more about how bazaars are operated in various cities. Because bazaars are an important part of a city. In the 4 cities, Bazaars are important to their tourism ministry, and tourism is important to all these 4 cities after all. Well, I don't think that it's that complicated to run bazaars. First question, maybe a research office, please. Yes. On the contributions of bazaars to the whole of Hong Kong, Britain, we don't have the information yet. We only have figures on London. But as for whether they have temporary or routine bazaars in London, Sydney, in our report, page 13 is mentioned that, for example, in Sydney there are 17 fixed bazaars and 99 in London, which are operated regularly. And there are also temporary bazaars in London, but we don't have the actual figure, but we can find them. In our report, there's also a list done comparing the policies of bazaars in various cities. So you can find them in the report. So under Secretary, I think Mr. Kwok and also Research Office said in our case, there are only like 2 bazaars in a location a year, whereas other cities are having bazaars run in a very mature manner. So how can Hong Kong catch up with the other cities? Thank you. Having looked at the report by the Research Office, I know that some are markets, some are bazaars mentioned there, but in Hong Kong, as you just mentioned, there are hawker policies or hawker licenses issued in some cities, and hawkers are put in the hawker centers and so forth. I think all these, we have them in Hong Kong. For example, Women Street, Temple Street, they are there permanently. But like in Sydney, I think we are talking about bazaars like those in Sydney, which are held irregularly or on a temporary basis. So we are talking about what the procedure should be like for such kinds of bazaars, and how we can do an even better job from the Food and Health Bureau's perspective. The FEHD doesn't have any policy to promote bazaars, but our policy is also bottom up. So if there's support from district councils, and then FEHD will coordinate. So we don't have statistics on economic benefits or to show how bazaars promote the local economy, because it's not really related to the terms of reference of FEHD. So I'd like to say that the information presented by the Research Office, some of those bazaars mentioned are also found in Hong Kong. But for some other bazaars, other types of bazaars, how we can simplify the procedures for applying to hold them, or if there's a coordinator, like in the example of Sydney, at the District Council or Home Affairs Department, if there can be coordinators provided, that would be helpful, I think. The FEHD earlier on said that if we can provide guidelines, simple guidelines, they are willing to look into that and see how they can come up with them. So let me respond, Professor Chen. Just then you said that Hong Kong is having similar policies. But after the 1970s, we have not already issued new hawker licenses. Compared to Singapore, well, it's not about hawker centers in public housing estates anymore, but in busy tourist areas, in downtown areas, they have issued hawker licenses for those areas. And even in the hawker centers, they would stage carnivals or entertainment activities. So that really helped promote and add vibrancy to hawker centers, and the Hong Kong government hasn't done that at all in that regard. So Mr. Kwok, I think, was saying that we failed to catch up with other places. Even Temple Street or Women Street have lacked vibrancy. Chairman, yes. Of the 43 fixed pitch hawker areas, you know that we have an overall hawker improvement plan with additional resources from the government. Since the fire last time, the big fire, we have tried to regularize the provision of hawker areas, and some people have surrendered the licenses, and we promised that under the plan back then, well, it was a 5-year plan, but I think now by 2018 the scheme will be finished, and we were trying to see whether there's any room for further review. And for example, in terms of reviewing the issue of giving licenses or the locations. Yes, it's not about a small number of reissuing of licenses, but whether you can possibly reissue licenses on a large scale so that there can be diverse hawker centers or bazaars. Okay, but anyway, it's time for other members to ask questions. Next one is Leung Yu-chung. Thank you, Chairman, and the Research Office for doing the research. But what attracts me most is paragraph 3.4, where it mentions the bazaars in Taipei. It actually, in 2013, the turnover turned to about 140 million Hong Kong dollars. I don't want to read out the figures for London. Actually, the turnover there runs to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's not just about benefits for the bazaars, but shops in the nearby areas. That's most important. I don't know whether the government has considered, like, well, you said that if you issue new licenses for hawkers, then many shops would be opposed to it because hawkers don't need to pay rents and shop owners have to pay rents, and yet the hawkers may undermine their own businesses. So has the government really studied, like in Women Street or Temple Street, the nearby shops there, are they benefiting or negatively affected? I can see that, particular seafood restaurants near those areas, they have very good business. Many people go to those restaurants, in Temple Street, and same for Women Street. Restaurants nearby, they benefit from the presence of such bazaars. So local businesses got a boost. Entertainment venues like cinemas also benefit. Well, I know, Professor Chan, you're not with the Economic Development Bureau, but on the license issue, you have to look at the economic aspect. So you have to talk to the other bureau, which actually looks at the economic impact. So why don't you write a new proposal to the CE designate so that, we can make use of the opportunity. Like in Taiwan, Singapore, it's shown that bazaars benefit the entire community, especially when there's an economic downturn. The economic benefits are even greater because the bazaars provide good employment opportunities. So I think you need to, maybe it's not you to do it, but you need to convey all these issues to the administration and let the government know that the hawker license policy should be an open one. The biggest problem now is that the hawker license are only given to descendants of the owners. And people had said a lot about how hard it was for them to get a license. And the licenses now are fewer and fewer in number. For example, people selling newspapers on the streets, they've told us that they have a little breathing space now. They've been always been driven off the streets because you always impose stringent checks on them to see, or you may penalize them for selling items other than newspapers. So your policy is not really open enough. You are actually trying to crack down on operators, on the streets. So you have to look at, indeed, how positive all these bazaars can be to the community, economically speaking. Don't just transfer the burden or to pass the ball to the Economic Development Bureau. Otherwise, you can never reach a conclusion or come up with any good suggestion. So please don't waste this chance for development. Professor Chen. Thank you, Mr. Lang. Because we just received this report, and we haven't been able to look at it thoroughly. But I think that members' views and our discussion today, I believe the chairman will continue to get us talking, and various bureaus have their own policy areas. For Food and Health Bureau, we will study again the content of this report and see what follow-up action we can take. As for the work of other bureaus, I think you can, for example, I think what we discussed at this subcommittee can be made known to other bureaus. I think after reading this detailed report, I have a lot of ideas in mind. During our past discussions, we were promoting, the idea that the bazaars are really good for employment of the grassroots tourism and also economic activities, and what sorts of support the government should help. I think you can actually see from the overseas examples, and yet the government here has not done anything. I want to get your feelings in depth. I know you wouldn't be able to answer me, but I do hope that you can communicate more with other government departments and bureaus so that you can have a more positive policy on bazaars. I do anticipate our review committee next summer, which will be held in public. I hope that now we have good support materials and we'll be in a better position to carry forward the work ahead. As for the review of hawker license, is that the comprehensive review of issuing of hawker licenses, will that be done next year? Well, maybe the Secretary can supplement. After we finish the 43 areas, hawker areas, after the scheme for that areas, on fire safety is done and for up work is done, then we'll look at how many spare licenses there are and spaces there are.
As Ms. Lau has said, when compared with other places, Hong Kong is a small place with a large population. So even if we are to launch any program, venue will be a challenge for us. Therefore, after we have completed the works carried out for the 43 hawker bazaars, we'll just check how many places will still be left. In 2013, we started the 5-year subsidy scheme for the hawkers. One after another, some progress has been made. Some hawkers have surrendered their licenses. As we have said, we'll just find out how many pitches will be available. We'll consult the district councils and we'll look at the actual circumstances, and then we'll decide when and whether more licenses will be issued to take up the vacant stores or vacant pitches. All right, next, Mr. Shukachan. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the Research Office for their report. As to what I make of the report, I have other views. I just wonder whether we still need to carry out such a research exercise. I think what has been written in the report has all been mentioned by us. That is empowerment, local community economy, giving the hawkers a livelihood. I think the research merely recognizes what we have already been saying, and in fact this is a trend. This morning we had a seminar, a 3-day international conference. One of the papers was about challenging poverty, and community economy has been cited as a way to address poverty. So I can tell you that this is the trend, and the ball is in the court of the government, while pressure is on the LegCo. All the neighboring cities are already doing it. If the government still says that it has an open mind, I think your reply is just an empty promise. If I may follow up with a few questions for the Research Office, I think you have my respect, and I will talk about your report against such a light. Now, the Research Office has covered a lot in your report. What about the resistance? In other words, as Mr. Leung Yiu-chung has said, whenever there is a proposal to have a bazaar, we'll be told that local people object, the shop owners would object, the government would say that it is an eyesore, it is not good. So usually that's the response. What about the overseas experience? Have they met with such objection? And how have they managed to overcome the hurdles? For Taiwan, we have all been there. We visited their night bazaars. They are right next door to local residents. A lot of people, noise, lights, rubbish, whatnot. So have you ever covered this part in your research? Can you supplement? And earlier on, a member has also asked this question. For EMs, it is said that EMs can also apply. But what about the number of successful applications in the past 3 or 5 years? Now, it seems that the EMs can write a proposal. If the district councils say yes, then you'll give the green light. So tell us how many EM groups have got it. And then for the proposal to set up a bazaar, according to the research paper, it is an easy job in overseas countries. How easy is it? Is it a half-page template? You just give your name or what? Is it just like asking for a visa and it is just a few minutes job and then half a page and then you will get it? So can you show us the template if there's one? I want to pick up the point made by KK Kwok. I have to say that there is a bit of self-interest here. Now KK Kwok has said that the subcommittee would be happy to have a duty visit. My self-interest is that every morning I visit the markets together with my mother. So a few questions here. First of all, what about local objection? What is the reaction by the overseas governments? Well, the circumstances do differ from one place to another, so we didn't actually single out the feedback of a proposal. What we've been interested in has been the local concerns when there is a bazaar. Well, indeed, the difference the experience varies. Like in the case of Sydney, well, they do have a lot of facilitating measures, but still applicants have to meet the relevant requirements. Sometimes they have a very strict requirement. Say, for example, vehicles cannot go into the city center, and then the bazaar operators would think that vehicular flow would be restricted and you would not attract enough people to go there. And then for London, I think what they want to do is that they have been incorporating bazaar as part of their city development plan, and resources will be deployed. But not every city council has got as many resources as the others. Sometimes there's an argument about the uneven distribution of resources. Some city councils have been asking for more resources, but then resources have come from the income generated by the bazaars. But then again, they are being restricted as to what can be charged, like the administrative fees only. So sometimes it is difficult to accumulate enough money to enhance or improve the facilities. For Singapore, they have many market centers or hawker centers. A survey shows that 97% of the citizens visit and shop at such hawker centers. I think they are worried as to whether new entrants will be interested to join the trade, given that the population is aging. So they would like to modernize the operational mode. They hope that there will be young people going to the bazaars and set themselves up as operators. so as to rejuvenate the centers. For Taipei, they have quite a large number of unlicensed hawkers, so this has given rise to environmental hygiene problems. The government has been very tolerant. As long as there aren't too many complaints, they will still tolerate the hawkers there. But then when there is a serious environmental hygiene problem, they have to enforce the law, and this may result in confrontation or conflicts. So the problem varies from one place to another. As to the application forms, in some places they do have templates, and we have them. If necessary, we can certainly make available copies of the templates. Basically, it is very simple. Some personal data like contact details. Usually the bazaars are being approved on the basis of an event. So you just have to give the purpose, the reason, whether police would be needed to help with the closure of roads, whether parking would be provided. So they will ask you what has to be provided as a support measure. And then there will be a list, and then the applicants know about the contact persons and telephone numbers of various departments. So it's a matter of a few pages. As far as the application form is concerned, we can make it available to members for your reference. Thank you. Yes, I think it will be a very good reference material. We want to know how simple it is. Last time, our government told us that even when the form runs to a few up to more than 10 pages, it is still simple. But in overseas countries, it's just a matter of few pages, and they even have a coordinator to help. So research office, do give us the information. It will be good reference material. And then Mr. Chiu Ka-chun has also picked up the point made by Claudia. That is, how many EM organizations have successfully applied for Bazaar to be organized. Well, in Samshupo, we do have Bazaar activities, and we do have the participation of EMs, like the Turkish coffee. But then it was run by local operator. But then it's an EM product. Well, we can sort of look at it at two levels. Probably, Chair, you're talking about an EM operating a Bazaar store. And then another level is that EM participation. Well, in fact, we did look at that question as to whether we have got EMs acting as organizers. Like the Undersecretary has said, probably we can liaise with the HAB, because the HAB does have a role to play in this policy. Well, I think it is something worth our while to look deeper into it. EMs do have employment problems. We need the government to help them to overcome cultural differences and language barriers. Now, for local people, it is difficult to apply for approval to set up a bazaar, not to mention the EMs. So I think it is something we need to take up. Please liaise with the HAB. Try to see if they have got a dedicated officer to communicate with the EMs, so that there is a way for them to make a living. A question has been asked 2 times. Let me sort of give a reply. The idea was whether we could go overseas on a duty visit to look at the overseas experience. I would like to defer to the clerk. Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 members mentioned whether a subcommittee or a panel can organize an overseas duty visit. I'm referring to the Chairman's Handbook, and probably you will have a copy with you. What is being said here is that if a panel or a subcommittee would like to organize a duty visit, there are points for you to note. as well as the procedures to be enforced. You may go on a duty visit, but first of all, you need to have the approval from the House Committee. We are making use of the electrical resources. We need to apply to the House Committee, and then for each electrical member within any term, you will be entitled to a specific sum of money for duty visits. So if there is a duty visit and if you take part, then the money will be deducted from that account. Now, I just want to mention that we have a term of 12 months. If we are to go on a duty visit, we need to make arrangements in advance. We need to decide on the places to go to. We need to do research. We have to do liaison work. We may have to invite public officers to join us on the duty visit. So it takes time to complete the process. So perhaps I'll try to see whether we have sufficient time in the remaining 6 months to organize a duty visit. Now, for London and Sydney, it appears that they are good models to follow. Perhaps we can choose one out of the two. But then the main point is we've only got 6 months left. We don't know whether there's sufficient time for us to make the arrangements. Next, Mr. Roy Kwong. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude towards the research office. They have produced a good research report. Well, other than overseas countries, I think in Hong Kong, we can also learn from our painful lessons. I used to be with the Yunnan District Council. I think you know about Tin Sha Bazaar. Do you know about the background of Tin Sha Bazaar, and do you know about the painful lesson? Well, next to the river, there used to be an early morning bazaar. I have been helping the old ladies and old men, and they had some hawking activities before the FHD staff officers turned up for work.
If I remember correctly, in 2007-2008, there were hawkers who, when trying to escape from the FHD officers, jumped to their death in the river. So there was much talk then, why would that happen? And then, after that, you can see that the Tin Kwong market became even more controversial, and then Tin Sha market came into being. So people were saying that, well, a market will meet the needs of a local community because Tin Sha is totally monopolized by link rate. But what's sad is that when the Tin Sha market was first created in my own office, many people submitted forms to me, but I told them that they should not give me the forms. So Tin Sha market was so popular, many people wanted to apply to run market stores there. So there are tens of stores there. And you can't imagine there were 1,000 applications. So in the end, people who couldn't get a spot got very mad. And about 2 months later, those who couldn't get a space became happy because there were lots of problems running the stores in Tin Sha market. Those who got the store approval rather vacate their own store and just to pay the rent without operating any business there. What caused that? Well, I think you can find some ideas from the research office report. Because the location is like in the case of Singapore, convenient location is very important. So Tin Sha market is such a case that if people want to get to that market, people have to go a roundabout way to get to the market. And also, it's very difficult for you to get people to get there, and it's not close to any train station. There were few visitors, and also cooked food, meat are not allowed there. So you can imagine it can't follow the path of the night market in Taipei, and neither can it replace the function of wet markets. So even though initially there were many people who applied to run stores there, those who got the approval ended up feeling very, very regretful and sorry. And at a later stage, someone who got the right to run a store decided to vacate the store, and someone forced them to operate for 8 hours a day. Otherwise, they will be held liable for breaching the law. So because of the Tin Kwong estate, that transform into Tin Shan markets. But you can imagine, you can't expect all women to have stores, run stores for many hours a day. So what it shows is that with a painful experience in Tin Shan market, a healthy bazaar, you need to have the community capital, because that will be a main source of support for the bazaar. So you should not impose too many limitations or restrictions on the bazaar. I also hope that the administration later on, if you were to promote bazaars, if you want to come up with the policy on that, please be bold. In Taiwan, they made bazaars or night markets busy because of great food. So, in the previous generation, you can imagine a culture of people gathering together for food and activities and fun under a big tree. So you can have the same vigor. But what's most important is the government should not intervene too much. Okay. So you make a proposal, right? Yes. I just want the government to really try to pull down unnecessary restrictions. Okay, I think the Home Affairs Department actually has a pivotal role to play. You all know the Tonghua, which is the operator of the market you mentioned, it did hire social workers to help run the place. In the early days of the Tin Shan market, it really was restricted in a way that it could only sell dry food or dry goods. But later on, the FEHD gave it license to sell cold meat. Right now, there are some cooked food stores in the market. Lately, we found that we communicated with them again, and we found that they could actually sell dumplings there, which are really popular. So because of the provision of cooked food, more people went there. In Yunlong, there are some markets that actually try to learn lessons from the operator in the Tin Shan markets. Thank you, Ms. Wong, for your feedback. So thanks for pointing out that you know that provision of cooked food can make a bazaar more popular. So maybe you're more lax with market selling dry foods, but if you are too stringent, in your policy on cooked food, then that may not help a bazaar. So try to remove as many restrictions as possible. Next one, Fernando Zhang. Thank you, the Secretariat, for providing the report for us. It is Wenwen Xiu Kao-chun said, I think what the report says is sort of well known to us, but the report itself, the research, the concise report does capture the policies on bazaars in other cities, and the comparison with Hong Kong is important because it gives us know how Hong Kong fares with other cities. Other cities confirm the role and contributions of bazaars, whereas in Hong Kong, it's not that we don't recognize bazaars, but our attitude is too wide open. If you want to do it, you do it. You can make it, then you do it. Go ahead. If you get the approval of District Council, you fund the location, you just give it a try. But compared to other cities, I think we're not as proactive. On the one hand, I can see that, on the basis of this report, how other cities are actually taking more initiative. On the other hand, the Chief Executive C.Y. Leung also, in his last weeks in office on link rate, he has negatively criticized it. Actually, he's been quite outspoken and in making comments. And meetings have been held with the senior management of link rates. So one effective way to counter the effect of link rate is to create bazaars near its shopping arcades. I think that's one characteristic of Hong Kong that we need to pay attention to. Besides those cities which, actually are so proactive with bazaars, I think Hong Kong needs to overturn a wrong policy which puts many people in the grassroots of shopping, including shopping arcades, being monopolized by link rates. Right now, with us today is the representatives from FEHD and Food and Health Bureau. I don't know whether you can do anything with link rate, but it seems like it's really not your part of your scope of work. But you dictate the policy on bazaars, right? You are the bureau responsible for bazaar policies, and you take the lead in implementing the policies. I don't know what to do. Theoretically speaking, senior officials said link rate, has such great negative impact on people's livelihoods. You know that one effective way is to counter the influences by creating bazaars. That's a common thinking in the community. So how can we try to get things done? I don't know whether the F&H Bureau have any idea, or the CE, or the Chief Secretary, who share the same view on link rate. Have they got any influence at all on the bazaar policies? I mean, the two top officials. We've got only 2 months left in the government term. But Professor Chen, I heard that you could be promoted. So what about the next term of government? I know you can't speak on their behalf, but I'm sure, the other 2 officials from FNHB will continue to remain in your position. So can you try to take a more proactive approach, particularly in Hong Kong, given that Hong Kong has been so monopolized by link rate? Let me supplement. We did invite the Economic Development and Commerce Bureau to attend this meeting, but they did not show up today. Still, taking the lead is the Food and Health Bureau. So maybe Professor Chen, you can respond. I'll ask Ms. Wong to respond. If you can recall, on May 9th, under the housing panel, the administration is one administration, and we are interconnected among other government departments in places where the link is active. Say Tin Yu Estate, the Tin Yu Shopping Arcade as an example. The housing department already obtained the approval of Lands Department and link rate to organize bazaars there in the summer. Besides Tin Yu Estate in Tung Chung, there were bazaars, even though they were not held within the area of the housing authority. Through the cooperation of Lands Department, locations were identified before. So if there's a need among residents and if there are advocates for bazaars, then under the current mechanism, we can get those bazaars held. The Tin Yu Estate case was unprecedented, right? So far, I think organizations have pointed out that it's difficult to apply or get approval. But all of a sudden, that one-off approval was given. But many organizations were not aware of it. They only knew about it after the approval was given. So are there channels for local or civic organizations to take part in bazaars? Last time, housing department staff at the housing panels mentioned about the mechanism. So once they receive applications, they would follow the steps under the mechanism. So let me sum up. The housing department last time, after the discussion on bazaars in this subcommittee, they really broke ground by opening up the space to non-governmental organizations to organize non-profit-making bazaars. So no profits could be obtained. But I hope that you can adopt the same policy, continue with this policy, and open it up to other organizations. Next one with questions is Leung Kwok Hong. I think cooked food is an issue. I remember we used to see hawkers being caught because of the provision of cooked food, and sometimes oil spilled to the body of hawkers, and it really got dangerous. So if you evict hawkers from a site, let's not talk about the hygiene of the food first. If you don't arrest the hawkers, they wouldn't run away from the spot. and took the risk. So I think for bazaars, you shouldn't expect unlicensed hawkers to be operating there and be at risk. So I think you really need to reconsider open fire cooking. Should it be allowed? Is the key. If you go to, I know food is so important to people. If you want to get something to eat while you're walking on the streets, like pub food. When you have drinks at a pub. What is pub food? Pub food is not delicious, but you just want to have something to munch on. Peanuts, are given, even if it costs the bar owner to suffer losses. Because if you eat elsewhere, you wouldn't drink at the pub. So that's the key. No matter how hard it is, you need to solve this issue. Because only if you provide the food can you attract people. Before, in a cinema, many years ago, beside the cinema, areas beside the cinema must be very busy because people did some shopping or also had some herbal tea before they enjoyed a movie. Of course, the hygiene standards now are different, but you must actually approve the provision of cooked food because in Taiwan and Thailand, people can enjoy cooked food on the street and nothing happens. Nobody got killed. So we're all human beings. People like to eat while they're, having a good time or walking on the street. You need to facilitate those who like to have foods to eat while they're walking on the street. That's part of the economy, Or you're eating while you're walking and you see a pair of jeans and you buy the jeans. That's it. That's how economy becomes active. So you want to promote more economic activities, you have to think out of the box. You need to tackle the key issue here.
We are always stuck in this particular point. If you don't like having open fire cooking, why don't you talk to the industry? I'm sure you can find a solution. During winter time, if you can recall that in the past we had a few dollars in our pocket and we're very happy to buy some roasted chestnuts or salted eggs. Now, when you go to Taipei, the chicken on rice is not cheap, but then it's just very attractive, and people like to buy a drink while they are strolling on the street. You don't get them at a 7-Eleven store, like sugarcane drink or some herbal tea. So if a hawker can prepare a drink that is nutritious and tasty, then he will have business. Learn Kwok Hong. I finish. I think that's the key to the question. Departments are going to relax the requirements. Allow me to give a reply. I think our regulatory policy is clear. For dry goods, we will give an advice and then we'll enforce the law. But then for cooked food, in particular open fire cooking, we have to take into account the prevailing circumstances, and then the factor of public safety will be decisive in our law enforcement action. For cooked food with open fire cooking, if you recall the Bazaar in April, you can tell that if they have the GU logo on their cooking utensils, and if you have got a sufficient distance between the stalls, and when there's sufficient preventive measures, we have given approval to open fire cooking. But then in the case of just warming up the liquid desserts or the sugarcane drinks, I don't think that would be a problem. So I can see that you are making a start about giving approval to open fire cooking. It won't be easy. When compared with overseas experience, I think our procedures are very cumbersome. That's why we would like to have a review session so as to streamline the procedures. Allow me to jump the queue to follow up the question asked by Learn Kwok Hong. Question for the research office. Now, understand that the administration is very concerned about the process of cooking raw food. In other words, we only allow the warming up of cooked food instead of cooking raw food. So I want to know if we can learn anything from overseas bazaars. Do they allow cooking of raw food on the site? Or what do they do in relation to the food manufacturing licenses? I'd like to defer to Ms. Zhang. For Singapore, for temporary bazaars or temporary markets, well, at temporary markets, they do have cooked food stores. However, there is this requirement.
要有某一啲設施嘅。
Certain facilities are mandatory. Dishwashing. There must be an adequate facility to wash the dishes, and then food storage would be regulated. Such has to be complied with before cooked food can be allowed. Otherwise, it is a matter of the selling of cooked food instead of cooking the food on the site, and then the food has to come from licensed food suppliers. In other words, are you saying that they do allow the cooking of raw food, but then it is subject to stringent requirements? If not, the food has to be prepared off the site. Yes, the food is prepared off the site and supplied by licensed food suppliers. What about the experience in other places, like in Sydney? You can try to look up the information and try to answer the question later on. I hope the Bureau can understand that we can have two sets of requirements. Please consider allowing the cooking of raw food, though you can subject it to stricter requirements. Ted Hui, I've read the research report. I think the way is now clearer for us. Just now, some members suggested that we should deregulate. Some members have said that the department should take the initiative. I think the subcommittee has already talked a lot about the concepts as well as the difficulties that we have been facing. So we have identified the problems. Can't we be more specific about the way forward? Like in the research report, we are told about the experience in different places. Their governments do have a specific market or hawker policy instead of just relying on food safety related laws. What about our government? Can you re-examine the role of the government? Like there is this idea of a market panel and market coordinator. They also provide sponsorship or subsidies to the market operators. They have concessional range. And in some places, even training is being provided. So you can see that it is a matter of responding to the needs of the operators. In Hong Kong, can we do the same in the light of the feedback from the organizers? Of course, it depends on whether the government has got the will. I think bazaars should be more a topic for the CEDB and the Tourism Commission. I feel sorry for you. You're made to come here. But please don't waste the time. Let's make the good use of the time available. I think you know full well what the problem is. Now, the current term of the government is going to end soon, but I'm sure many of you will be staying. So please tell us whether you're going to take the initiative to come up with new measures. Professor Chen, as I have said, the report has only been given to us a short while ago. We haven't had time to have a detailed examination. I think we need to be sure about the policy objective, and then we can find out what we can do within our portfolio. We believe that, well, in fact, the subcommittee has had many meetings. It is also important to streamline the procedures. This is one of the practical ways to help the applicants to succeed. We are happy to spend time on reading your report, and I hope that the relevant policy bureaus will do likewise. Well, for us to have discussion of such a nature going back and forth, I don't know why we have to do this, but I still hope that the research report will serve as a good reference material. The administration has always been saying that its application procedure is very simple. Now we have got the overseas examples telling us what is meant by simple procedure. For the government, you require a very detailed proposal. It may not be reasonable, because if you want to have details, then probably you need a coordinator to help the applicants. For the community, they are in the dark, they don't know what is needed. Now you can see that elsewhere the guidelines are very clear, and there is even a coordinator to help with the drafting of the proposal or the filling out of the application form. Next, Dr. Yu, thank you, Research Office, for your report. If you can't answer the questions off the cuff, please do so afterwards. In Hong Kong, we have always been told that there would be complaints from neighboring shop owners. There is this challenge that how come that the hawkers can compete directly with the neighboring shop owners when they don't have to pay rent. Please tell us how the question is addressed by the selected cities. I think Sydney must charge the land use fees, but what about the other cities? So please tell us what do they have got in relation to payment of land use fees, as well as the conflicts among the land users. Now, in Hong Kong, usually we need a middleman, we need an agent in the form of an NGO. Individual hawkers cannot apply on their own. So what about the overseas experience? Does it mean that in Hong Kong the NGO acts like a coordinator? We have some information. If you need the details, perhaps we can check the information after the meeting. As to the complaints from nearby shop owners, in London they take a positive view. If you care to refer to paragraph 3.4, a survey has been carried out, and for the market consumers, other than spending money in the market, they also spend in shops nearby. And the survey has shown that the shops nearby have benefited from the markets, so they play a supplementary role. So it isn't a zero-sum game. Yes, that's the case in London. The outcome is positive. The finding is positive. Well, for the land use fee in Sydney, Sydney has a bottom-up approach. For other places, it is different. It is an initiative from the government. Therefore, in Sydney, they do charge a land use fee. This is because the mechanism is different. In other places, the government builds the facility, and so it is different. Maybe for the details, I can defer to my colleague. Well, in different places, when they set up a bazaar, they do have this process. That is, they will consult the views of the nearby shops and the nearby residents. In the case of Sydney, when they want to set up a bazaar, in particular, when they talk about a regular bazaar, they do have a consultative process. After initial approval has been given to the location, then the applicant must prepare a detailed market proposal. And after the proposal has been drafted, the local government will then act as a coordinator in organizing a consultation process, sounding out the views of the nearby residents and the nearby shops. So the applicant will then fine-tune the proposal in the light of the feedback, and then the local government will give final approval. In other words, in the course of the matter, the local feedback will also be taken on board. In this way, they can lower the number of complaints, and they can minimize the impact on their nearby shops and residents. I believe this is the job for the Home Affairs Bureau. They need to carry out local consultation and not just consulting the views of the district council. The next to speak would be Nathan Law. Thank you, Chair. Arising from Edward's question, I need to tell you that I grew up in Tung Chung. Tung Chung is well known for its hawkers. Many people have made a living by hawking, and I know families who depend on hawking as the means of livelihood. For Yat Tung Estate, in the beginning of year 2000, I think everything was fine. As time went by, we had got more and more arrests and suppression. When we have a group of hawkers, would you say that it is a bazaar? I think this is all because of the redevelopment of a link road market. And upon redevelopment, they started to run a night market. Now for Tung Chung residents, by the time they return to Tung Chung, all the other shops are closed, and so there's a strong demand for night snacks. Now, many nighttime activities have gone. This is because the link market is running late, and they will be open for business up to 1 or 2 a.m. So many hawkers have been driven away. Now, as a result of the nighttime session of the link market, we've seen that the regulatory actions are getting stricter and stricter. I think this is to pave way for business to be picked up by the link rate.
But the prices there are very high, and the variety of foods there are not as great as in bazaars. So the problem is that it's more really about overall, hawker policy. But commercial pressure in the district from link rate or other stakeholders, actually the pressure can be felt by hawkers. So Edward Yu's question reflects the biggest problem facing Hong Kong, which is different from London, because in London the shops owners they actually support the policy, but in Hong Kong it's the opposite. So therefore, in the face of such pressure, how are you going to coordinate and try to strike a balance that is in a community where link shopping arcades are around, and yet shops in the arcades run by link rate could complain against the presence of bazaars? How are you going to deal with that? And also another example is Tin Wan market. I find that a big problem with Tin Wan is now the government always says that it has the bottom-up policy, but the process is very slow. And the government should have taken some initiative, as in the cases of Tin Wan. The shopping center there was sold by link rate to a Chinese enterprise. Since then, the whole shopping arcade has been closed, except the banks or a few convenience stores. But Tin Wan is a community with more than 10,000 residents. People have to walk down a huge slope, a giant slope, and a long distance to go to a convenience store. For elderly men or women, once they have done the grocery shopping at the supermarket at the foot of the slope, it would have taken them an hour to finish the trip, to do a return trip indeed. So if it's summertime, it's even worse. So bazaars can feel a gap, when a private shopping mall is closed, and the bazaars can fill the gap because then people can just get what they want from the bazaars and meet the needs, urgent needs of residents in a particular district. So does the government know about such issues, particularly communities with such problems? Not every community is helped by local organizations. Are you trying to provide a solution for these communities? We're not talking about commercial interests or large areas here. We're talking about people, facing urgent demands. Undersecretary, thank you, Mr. Lau, for your question. From the perspective of Food and Health Bureau, I would say that hawker policy, for nearby areas, whether there are shopping malls owned by Linkrate or not, or whether there are complaints from nearby shops or not. Well, it is really a complicated issue. You can see from the study that overseas there haven't been much complaints, and there are government departments that have found that shops do benefit from the presence of bazaars. But if you can recall, in Hong Kong, in different districts, shops have complained against bazaars, saying that they've stolen their business. So from our perspective, or from the FEHD's point of view, we do hope that the district councils themselves can try to settle such complaints. And as long as there's support from district councils, only then should FEHD, activate the work. Let me clarify one thing here. Before district council sorted out the dispute, before shops have stopped complaining, that means you can't implement such policy. Yes, if you cannot settle the complaints, then we can't do anything. That means the government will not have a proactive, strong policy to promote bazaars. Like in dealing with the complaints, we need to consider what sort of complaints they are, the nature, and if they fall under the category of work of FEHD, then the department will take action. But for most complaints, it really requires the work or the involvement of district councils and home affairs department, because often they're about complaints in various small areas or disputes there. And there are also issues of environmental hygiene. So we must say that, of course, if there are environmental hygiene problems caused by bazaars or nuisance caused by bazaar, then FEHD needs to take action. If we cannot settle the complaints, then if the Home Affairs Department, the District Council cannot do anything to resolve the dispute, then, actually the problems could only intensify. So based on past experience, we do need to adopt a bottom-up approach. Chairman, can she answer our second question? That is, in Team 1 estate, for example, the whole estate is short of support. For example, in some public housing estates, at the bottom, normally there are some units, right? There could be some empty units. Maybe it doesn't come under your scope of work, but could you allow some operators to sell foodstuff or some products at the units downstairs? And this is part of the policy, comes under the work of the whole housing department. I'll let the housing department know and reflect your concern to them. Yes, I think you need to get the housing department's approval. I think you need to try to contact maybe non-governmental organizations to try selling various goods in public housing estates. want to say that the research office has done a lot of work in getting overseas experience. I think in overseas cities, besides bottom-up approach, the governments there also do have a proactive role. For example, they provide coordinator or bazaar small groups and so forth. The department would be involved in promoting or resolving disputes. And the consultation at the district level, what do residents view, whether they think that there's a way to resolve the competition among shops and bazaars or to remove any wrong thinking. I think it's the government department there to do the district consultation and intervene. So I think you can make reference to the report, to what's happening overseas. So you're trying to create a mutually beneficial situation and then create. And would you regard link rate as a district figure? I think it's really something worth considering. At the review committee next time, I think we can have a more in-depth discussion on all these issues. So members, if Eddie Chu, okay, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I was at another meeting just then. I want to ask the research office. Singapore, I can see from the report that, it's similar to Hong Kong in the history in that it wanted to resolve the issue of itinerant hawkers. Therefore, it had a large-scale resettlement plan, as mentioned in 3.11 paragraph, to build 100 hawker centers. I'd like to ask, for the hawkers who've moved into the centers, I think in Hong Kong, maybe the situation in Hong Kong is not exactly the same, but in Singapore, once the hawkers have moved into the hawker centers, then the licenses, what will happen to the licenses throughout the generations? In the license, say the license holder passes away, would the government maintain the same number of licenses, or force, like in the case of Hong Kong, make it mandatory that only descendants of the owners can inherit license? Have you studied that? Can you speak up a bit? We can look back at our information, but in the 1970s, 80s, the hawkers resettled in the hawker centers, they do have an assignment program. That is, they can assign licenses to other people. But the assigned hawkers, well, those who were resettled in the centers are paying subsidized rent. But under the assignment program, hawkers who operate under the assigned program, within a 3-year period, they need to pay increased rents to market level within a 3-year period. But there is a mechanism allowing them to the hawkers to transfer the licenses. So the rental up to market levels, that means Singaporean government is charging the rents. So when the rents are at market level, how about the rental adjustment mechanism then? They do have a dedicated rental adjustment mechanism. They have professional assessors who would study the market rents and then make proposals. But based on the information we've got, the rents tend to be, that is, compared to, tend to be lower than the rents of shops in the private markets. So that is, so the government is running the centers instead of outsourcing, right? The centers, right? Yes. In Singapore, there are 110 hawker centers in total. 107 of them actually were built in the 1980s. So all of them were managed by the government. But it has a new plan to build 20 more new hawker centers. They're exploring new modes to operate these new centers. The 3 latest ones actually are social enterprises. So they run as social enterprises, organizations that are approved by the government there. So in the days ahead, they may continue to adopt this new mode of operation. So I think the research office on the licensing system in Singapore and the mode of operation, maybe you can provide us with more information so as to help with our review meeting next week, so we can have more grounds, information for discussion. It's really of much reference value. So also, could you, on the questions raised, provide a bit more information to us, particularly on how the various cities deal with food licenses in relation to fire safety, and also how they handle cooking raw foods. So would the cities allow the operators in bazaars to have kitchens, or to have to sell pre-cooked foods? So thank you for your research, very inspiring and affirming research. So I think it's about time to wrap up the meeting. I think I can ask my own questions at the review meeting next time. So the next meeting, when we have the public review meeting, that will be the review meeting next time. But then after that, we'll have a regular meeting. And Kokaki and Xu Ka-chun asked whether we could have an overseas inspection trip. It takes time for the Secretary to identify the locations and make arrangements. So we do need to get some guidelines as well on how to select the city to go to. So we need to have a concrete plan first before we can apply for the overseas inspection trip at the House Committee. And although whether we can extend the term of this meeting, I don't know. So I think we need to just discuss more with the Secretariat first. And then at the next meeting, I will update you on the latest. There's no other business. Meeting will be adjourned today. Thank you all. Thank you to the 2 colleagues from the Research Office and the administration. We'll meet at the next meeting. It's scheduled. Next meeting will be the review committee meeting on the procedures for application.